Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here with my May wrap-up. Lighting is a little bit different. I'm filming this late at night on a weeknight because that's just how things are going to work this week. It's the end of the school year and everything is happening at once, and this is the time I have. So we're going to do it. Because I did not want to wait any longer to tell you about all of the books that I read in May. I only have 3 physical books, but I read through a bunch of ebooks, listened to a ton of audiobooks. I'm really loving listening to audiobooks on my commutes now. So let's get into it. Also, in the spirit of showing off my literary t-shirts this summer, today I have She's Reading Again. How novel. And first up, I listened to Dr. Whartles School by Anthony Trollope. This was the audiobook, also read by Sir Timothy West, because I discovered it was really short. So I thought, yay, I'll listen to that. And it's hard for me to know how to summarize this Trollope novel without completely giving away a really central plot point. So if you'd like to avoid spoilers for it entirely, you can skip ahead, but if not, because this is introduced pretty early on in the novel, it centers around Dr. Whartle, who runs a school for boys out of his home, as was very common in the Victorian period, and he employs a teacher there by the name of Mr. Peacock, who is very well thought of, very highly educated, and he and his wife live and work on campus, as it were. Until one day, a secret is brought to light about them both. Spoiler here. The spoiler is that Mr. and Mrs. Peacock cannot technically be married, and they are escaping her current and sort of ex-husband. Technically, they are being bigamous. And it follows all of the scandal that ensues that revelation, and it follows what happens when another person involved in that scandal suddenly shows up in the UK on their doorstep and begins extorting all sorts of things out of them in order to preserve their reputation. It also included my first glimpse of how Trollope viewed Americans, which was interesting, I have to say. Although this particular book calls it a scathing portrayal of American manhood, but quite honestly, I don't think we portrayed ourselves any differently in Southern epics or Westerns. So I'm not sure how scathing it actually was, but nonetheless, it was a very interesting listen. At points, it did get a little tedious and a little bit too drawn out, but overall, it was very enjoyable. Then I read Austen at Sea by Natalie Jenner, and this came out at the end of May, I believe. Natalie Jenner, who wrote the Jane Austen Society and Bloomsbury Girls. This is her 3rd novel, I believe. And this one, yet again, is connected to Austen, but extremely loosely. It does end up sounding a lot more roundabout than it actually is. But we follow a New England judge in the 1850s or 60s, I want to say, who has started a Jane Austen book club with other Massachusetts Supreme Court judges, or district judges, whatever judges at the state level are called. And this is partly under the influence of his daughters. He is a widower, but he does have 2 daughters who are extremely independent and self-willed, much to his chagrin. He is very protective of them, especially after his wife passed. But somehow they strike up a correspondence with Frank Austen, Austen's youngest brother, who is still alive in the UK, although he is very old, and he encourages them to come and visit. And so they get on a steamer for Southampton to go and visit. The judge is distraught and begs 2 men that he knows to go with them. And Louisa May Alcott also ends up on this ship And all sorts of things unfold as they all get to know each other on the ship and once they disembark in England. And I don't want to say too much more than that because I think that would give the plot away. I felt like it was an interesting premise, but quite honestly, not one I was as interested in as her other two works. I think its points about Austen were really interesting. I think its points about feminism were very interesting, especially given what we're living through these days. But at other points, I just felt like I couldn't keep track of all of the characters. It was much harder to get a firm grasp on who was who in this novel than I felt it was in her previous two novels. Maybe that was just me and the space I was in at the time, but it just didn't do it for me quite the same way that her other two novels did. Then I read If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. And oh my gosh, was this beautifully written. I loved this book so much, which I am extra pleased by, because as I think I've mentioned before, I didn't love Giovanni's Room. I really didn't. Just the way the narrator looked at himself was so disheartening and disconcerting to me that I just didn't love it. But I thought I might love this one a little bit more, and I was very much right. This was a wonderful read. This follows Tish, who is a young black woman, and her romance with Fonny, a young man who she knows from childhood. They grow up together. And you're constantly flip-flopping timelines without very clear demarcations of when you are, except for what she's talking about at the time. And so you get to see the development of their relationship over time as they've grown up together, but also you're seeing the development of their issues now when she realizes that she is pregnant, but Fonny has been wrongly accused of rape and has been imprisoned for it. And she and her family are doing the best they can to save for a lawyer to try and fight this case to get him released. But it's looking at the toll that all of that takes on all of their families and how they all deal with all of those revelations. And it really is just as simple as that, but it was so moving and so beautifully written that I was just stunned. Then I tried to listen to Mrs. March by Virginia Fato, but I DNF'd it. I got a quarter to a third of the way in, and I just couldn't stand it anymore. If you haven't heard of it, which I would be surprised because this made the rounds on BookTube a few years ago, this is a story about a woman who is the wife of a very famous author in New York City. And one day she is told by, I think, the server at the bakery that she always frequents, that the main character in his latest books seems to have been based quite a bit on her. At least this server thought it was. And Mrs. March is horrified by this because his latest protagonist is apparently an old, uncouth, ugly former prostitute. And you're just watching her spiral into more and more mania over this question. And after about a third of the way through, I could not take that much. I could not handle how neurotic she actually was. And she was very neurotic before the revelation even happens, and it just gets worse and worse. And I just hated everyone. I did not care how it turned out, quite honestly. I really didn't. So I thought, you know what? I need something lighter to listen to. So I borrowed Belinda Goes to Bath by M.C. Beaton, who was writing it as Marion Chesney, I believe. This is her writing what I thought were supposed to be mysteries, but apparently not, just Regency romances. This is book 2 in a series, and it follows Miss Hannah Pym, who is a housekeeper who has been left a huge amount of money by her former employer. And now, for the first time in her life, she can afford to travel. So she does. She takes the stagecoach that goes by the house every day and goes somewhere exciting, and adventures usually befall her. The first one ends up being sort of a mystery in that they are stranded at an inn in a snowstorm and dastardly things are being done, and she does manage to get to the bottom of it. So I thought this one would be relatively similar. Plus, it takes place in Bath. I lived in Bath myself for a bit, so I was extra excited to get to this one. I could not stand it. There was no mystery and almost no romance, as far as I can tell. I hated almost all of the characters again. And I realize that she was writing about a historical period in which Moors were very different. And I realized that she, being an older writer, was coming from a more antiquated perspective. But even so, these were published in the 90s. And I just found it very hard to swallow some of the opinions that these characters had, and that we as readers are also supposed to believe because they did indeed pan out that way. Such as, oh, as long as you solve that couple's money troubles and give them a steady income, of course he'll stop beating his wife. Or, ooh, I heard this young woman may have slept with someone once. So, of course that gives me free rein to walk into her room in the middle of the night and expect sexual favors. I just don't buy how, as a modern audience, we were expected to swallow those assumptions. So I did make it to the end, but I really didn't like it, and I don't know if I'm going to continue with the rest, to be honest. Then I read The House of Seymour by Joanna Hickson. And this was another one that, again, I thought would be really, really exciting, but fell a bit short of the mark for me. This is historical fiction about Isabel Williams, who is forcibly engaged to John Seymour, who at some point down the line inherits Wolf Hall Manor. So yes, these are the ancestors of Jane Seymour, famous third wife of Henry VIII, but we are looking at her grandmother. We're looking at the family during or slightly before, I think, the War of the Roses era. All the men have just come back from Agincourt. There's many references to that. So we're looking at that period. And so I thought this would be a really exciting look at how the family came to be, possibly a look at how the women of the family were particularly influential, because it opens with Jane Seymour looking at the proposed crest by the royal crest maker. There's a better term for that I can't remember at the moment. And they reference how her grandmother, her aunt, etc. were fairly common, so they wouldn't be reflected in that crest. And this then brings us into the story itself. So I really thought we were going to get a look at how those women in her family were influential in bringing about her family as we now know it. And I really didn't get that. I got that Isabel was forced into a really terrible marriage. And then I thought, okay, we're going to see something with this, how she rises above it. Maybe how she reforms him. I wouldn't love that very much, but maybe that's where it's going to go. Or this terrible marriage he's going to do something truly reprehensible that's going to cast a shadow over the family down the line. And no, none of those things happened. He just continued being a terrible person, but in a fairly everyday fashion, and continued being rewarded for it. That was it. There was no development there. There was no particular development with Isabel's character either. And then we also got the story of Jess, who is a shepherdess on the Avebury Close, quite close by, and how badly treated she is for being a woman in what is considered a man's job. She had to wear male clothing in order to do it well. She couldn't go to church a lot of the time, so the things that she goes through from the other townspeople are truly horrific. And then there's a storyline with a distant cousin coming in and wanting to become an archer. And you sit there thinking, okay, these have to interweave with the Wolf Hall storyline somewhere along the way. They are going to influence them. And they do interweave, but with no significant influence that I could tell. And I got to the end and I thought, really? I went through 400 pages for this? I don't know. I mean, it was well written, it just didn't live up to my expectations in terms of plot or import. Then I listened to The Asienda by Isabel Cañas, and I heard people rave about this, and I wanted to love it, but I wasn't entirely sure because it does definitely lean firmly into the gothic horror side of things, which typically doesn't work for me. But I had heard such good things, and I do love the gothic part of gothic horror, and I need to learn more about Mexican history, especially as a Spanish teacher. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity for me to do that, and I thought, okay, I will give this a listen. It was a fantastic listen. This story is set in the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution, so we're in the 1820s. And we follow a young woman named Beatriz, whose father is killed by insurgents after participating in the rebellion. And she and her mother are cast on the kindness of family, who are not very kind at all. And she is determined to get out any way she can. And so she marries a wealthy landowner named Rodolfo. And she goes off with him determined to make his house beautiful and habitable, the whole hacienda, and then invite her mother to live with her there. However, this is where the Rebecca similarities come in. When she gets there, she begins to discover that the house is haunted by the ghost of his first wife, who died quite mysteriously. And yes, I do mean that literally. The house is haunted. And horrible things begin to happen. And so she enlists the help of a local priest, who also happens to have magical gifts. On the cover, they call it a witch. They never... Well, I guess in the novel they do call him a witch. I'm sure there's a better term for it in Spanish, but his grandmother taught him to harness native powers and the native language to bend those powers for good. And he is trying to hide those powers from the Inquisition, which is still very strong. Not quite as strong as they're no longer part of the Spanish Empire, but it left its mark quite deeply in the people. And so Beatriz and Andres are trying to fight this horrible power together and try to get to the bottom of what happened to Rodolfo's first wife. And it is incredible. I could not figure out where that mystery was going to take us. At first, I thought it was going to be racially motivated and look at the colonization, the classism, the racism on which the Hacienda system was built. And it does indeed go there, but that's not the root cause. Then at first I thought it was going to be jealousy. You think it's going to be looking at abusive relationships, and it does look at all of those things, but the end mystery is kind of disappointing, but also kind of great in another way, in that it addresses another power dynamic, another relationship that is touched on in the novel. I loved the way the novel highlighted native languages, like, for lack of a better term, Aztec. I know there's another name for that language that I can't think of right now. I will put it on the screen. Or Mayan in the southern parts of Mexico, as opposed to Castellano, as opposed to what we know as Spanish. How deeply native people fought to preserve those languages against the colonizing and imperialist forces of the Spanish settlers right through the 1900s into the 20th century. It really is incredible, and it's stuff that I've looked into in my studies as well. So I love that it highlighted that, because a lot of people don't think about it. I loved the power dynamics. I loved the romance. I loved the ending, and I can't tell you why, But oh, it was such a good listen. It was so worth all of the stress and the nerves that I had while I was listening to it. In a similar vein, I loved reading Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. This was a fantastic book. This follows 5 women from the time they are girls into adulthood as they are part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is a government-sanctioned branch. They do have to keep themselves secret from the rest of society, but they do help in conquering otherworldly forces that seek to threaten the UK. And we follow all 5 of them as this child appears with incredible powers, off the charts. No one has seen the likes. And the official coven is really worried that this child might be Leviathan, who is prophesied to bring about the end of the world, huge amounts of destruction. And so various members of the coven, of these 5 women, have left the coven for a variety of reasons. Helena is now its leader, but the other women have left for a variety of reasons, be it family, for racial reasons, because of trauma and loss. And you watch how each of them react to the discovery of this child, and oh my gosh, the developments from there are incredible. I don't want to give away the twist that comes about halfway through, but I loved what it explored, and I love how the author particularly explored it. It was fantastic. I loved it so, so much, except for that last page. I hated the decision she made on that last page, and I'm so scared now to go and listen to the audiobook of book 2 because I don't know how this is going to go, and I'm really, really scared. But I do have to, because I do want to find out what happens to these people. And Nicola Coughlan narrates the audiobooks, and I love her as an audiobook narrator, so I really need to get to this. But if you were at all interested in this, especially now, I highly encourage you to read this book. In this day and age, read this book. It is fantastic. But then for something a little lighter and a little shorter, I decided to read The Time Garden by Edward Eager, which also magic, but not really. This is in his Half Magic series, which I have spoken about on the channel before. They are delightful, whimsical books for children about very strange sorts of magic that they can harness, usually in the summertime. In the 3 books previously, we've been following 2 sets of children. There are our original 4 siblings, and then in other books we will follow some of their children. So in this one, we are following the children yet again. And their parents have gone to London. One of their fathers is a playwright, and he's putting on his play in London, but they're not sure how it's going to be received, so they don't want to bring the children yet until they know it's a hit and they know they can settle there for a while. So the children are shipped off to live with someone's old aunt up in Massachusetts. And while they're there, yes, the house is lovely. Yes, they have beach access. They can go swimming. It's lovely. But on their first day or 2, they're wandering around and they suddenly discover a garden filled entirely with thyme, as in the herb. And they discover, through the help of a frog known as the Natterjack, that this thyme is magical and can help you time travel. And so they do. They use a variety of kinds of thyme to travel to many different places. And as long as they do some good wherever they travel, they will be allowed back again. And it's very cute, very sweet, very whimsical, and it was just a fun time. I don't know that I loved it as much as the others, but this one is quite fun. And you do, I have to say, get a slight preview of it in book 3. Yes, in book 3, Magic by the Lake. Then finally, while I was traveling, I only brought my e-reader with me, so I worked my way through some arcs, including The Accidental Debutant by Jane Dunn. I have read so many of Jane Dunn's Regency romances these days, usually all as arcs. I am very, very fortunate, and thank you to Boldwood Books for giving me that opportunity. But I loved this one too. It's our first novel of hers, surprisingly, that revisits characters from other novels that she's written in this same universe. So you can read it as a standalone, but it will slightly spoil things about an unsuitable heiress. So if you don't want to be spoiled for anything at all, read that one first, then come back to this one. I actually really loved that aspect. I loved getting to follow characters after their happily ever after and see what their everyday married life is like and how that then interweaves with our main character's love story. And in this one, we are following Raven Purefoy, who was a character in An Unsuitable Heiress as well, and Eliza, who is a young woman who was lost by her family at quite a young age and swept off to join the circus and trained as a trick rider. However, one day she decides she's going to run away, she's going to go to London to try and find out more about her birth family. She doesn't remember much, but she is determined to try and find out. However, on her first night in London, she is run over by Raven Purefoy's carriage, and things unfold from there. I wasn't entirely sure about this story. It felt like certain aspects were wrapped up really quite quickly until I read the afterword and discovered that Jane Dunn wrote this as a book celebrating all kinds and all sides of love, romantic or otherwise, and indeed grief, which to me is the opposite side of the coin. And that helped to put it all in perspective for me. Maybe it was the fact that I had just attended a wedding as well, so I was feeling extra soppy, but that ending really did do it for me. Plus, as Dunn herself wrote in the afterword, we desperately need a story celebrating and highlighting love right now. And I think that's very much true. If you're concerned about this one in terms of it being a romance novel, fear not. It is very much closed door, fade to black. It's really pretty clean. So, those were all of the books that I read in May. Let me know down below if you have further thoughts or questions about any of the books that I read. I am happy to talk with you more about them. Let me know also what was your favorite read of the month. I am always looking for recommendations. Given the size of my TBR, do I need them? No. But on the other hand, yes I do. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.